In 1958, a British bearing manufacturer did something nobody thought was possible. He beat Ferrari 6 times in a single season. And he did it with an engine built from motorcycle parts, a body designed by an aircraft engineer, and a grudge so deep it nearly killed him. His name was Tony Vandervell, and the car was the Vanwall. This is the story of 10 things you need to know about the machine that was built for one reason only: to destroy Ferrari. Number 10. The whole thing started because of bearings. Tony Vandervell was not a racing driver. He was a hard-nosed industrialist who manufactured engine bearings at his factory in Acton, West London. His company, Vandervell Products, produced a type called the thin-wall bearing. They were a snap-in part, backed by a steel strip that replaced the old-fashioned poured bearings used across the motor industry. The old bearings had to be cast in place and hand-finished to size, a slow and imprecise process. Vandervell's thin-wall bearings were precision components that snapped straight in, and they transformed engine manufacturing across the world. Vandervell supplied them directly to Maranello, and that relationship gave him something priceless: access. He could walk into Ferrari's factory, inspect their engines, study their designs, and see exactly what made the fastest racing cars in the world tick. Any other businessman would have been happy collecting the invoices. Vandervell was taking notes. Number 9. He bought Ferraris and painted them green. Before Vandervell built his own car, he bought the enemy's. In 1949, he purchased a Ferrari Grand Prix car, a Tipo 125, had it painted British racing green, fitted his own thin-wall bearings, and renamed it the Thin-Wall Special. Over the next several years, he campaigned a series of modified Ferraris in non-championship races across Britain. They were driven by some of the finest drivers available, including Reg Parnell, Mike Hawthorne, and Peter Collins. These were rolling laboratories. He tested his bearings under race conditions, studied the strengths and weaknesses of Italian engineering at every circuit, and figured out exactly where Ferrari could be beaten. The relationship between Vandervell and Enzo Ferrari was confrontational from the start. When Vandervell tore one of the Ferraris apart and found it assembled from used and cannibalized components, he sent Enzo a furious letter complete with photographs of the shoddy workmanship. Both men were cut from the same cloth, stubborn, demanding, and absolutely obsessed with engines. The difference was that Vandervell was building his hatred into a plan. Number 8. He quit the national racing effort in disgust. In the late 1940s, Britain launched a grand national project called BRM, British Racing Motors. The idea was to pool resources from across British industry and build a world-beating Grand Prix car with a screaming 16-cylinder engine. The ambition was enormous. The execution was a disaster. Vandervell was one of the project's most committed backers. He poured money into it. He even bought that first Ferrari specifically to give BRM's engineers practical experience with a real Grand Prix car, while they struggled to finish their own. Then he watched the whole thing collapse into committee meetings, bureaucratic delays, and endless political squabbling. The BRM V16 was technically brilliant, but chronically unreliable, and the trust committee running the project seemed more interested in debating procurement policies than winning races. Committees do not win races. When interminable problems of supply and cooperation hampered the program, Vandervell smashed his way through the red tape, but it was never enough. His patience ran out completely. He walked away from BRM and decided to do it himself. He would build his own car, run his own team, and beat Ferrari on his own terms. His stated mission was simple. He wanted to beat, and this is a direct quote, those bloody red cars. Number 7. He hired an aircraft designer to shape the body. When Vandervell decided to build a proper Grand Prix car in 1956, he did not go to the usual racing car designers. He went to Colin Chapman, a young engineer who was still building lightweight Lotus sports cars in a small workshop and had never designed a Grand Prix car before. Chapman designed the chassis using a space frame construction that was dramatically lighter and stiffer than the Cooper-built chassis Vanwall had been racing with previously. Then, Chapman recommended someone even more unconventional for the bodywork. Frank Costin. Costin was not a car designer by trade. He was an aerodynamicist at the de Havilland Aircraft Company, the firm that built the Mosquito bomber and the Comet jet airliner. His only previous car body design had been the Lotus Mark 8 sports racer 2 years earlier, and he had never touched a Grand Prix car. Costin applied pure aviation aerodynamic principles to the Vanwall, and the result was a teardrop-shaped body so aerodynamically clean that no Ferrari could stay with it on the high-speed straights of the 1950s Grand Prix circuits. His bold decision to increase the car's frontal area actually reduced overall drag because the smoother shape meant less turbulence. The car looked like nothing else on the grid. The press called it the teardrop Vanwall. Other teams were still building boxy, upright machines with exposed wheels and flat panels. The Vanwall looked like it belonged in the sky. Number 6. The engine was 4 motorcycle cylinders bolted together. This is where the story gets truly unusual. Vandervell had deep connections to Norton motorcycles through his family, and Norton's racing division had developed one of the finest single-cylinder engines in the world for their 500 cubic centimeters Grand Prix bikes. Vandervell's engineers, led by Norton's own Leo Kuzmicki, took the cylinder head design from Norton's racing single and built a 4-cylinder Grand Prix engine by combining 4 of those motorcycle cylinders onto a common crankcase. The bore and stroke matched the Norton racing engine exactly. Kuzmicki designed the combustion chambers with squish areas, a technique Norton had pioneered on their racing singles in 1951 to increase turbulence and improve combustion. The crankcase itself borrowed casting patterns from Rolls-Royce. The connecting rods were forged from nickel steel, machined all over until the web was barely 2.5 millimeters thick, then polished smooth. Every component was built to aircraft tolerances, not car factory standards. The result was a 2.5-litre inline-4 producing around 265 horsepower on aviation fuel by 1958. It was not the highest output engine on the grid. It did not need to be. Combined with Costin's aerodynamic body, the Vanwall had enough straight-line speed to run down anything Ferrari put on the track. Number 5. Vandervell refused to make it all British. This is what separated Vandervell from the BRM crowd. BRM was obsessed with building an entirely British car, sourcing every component from domestic suppliers regardless of whether better alternatives existed elsewhere. Vandervell did not care about flags. He cared about winning. If the best fuel injection system in the world came from Germany, he used Bosch. If the best disc brake technology came from an American patent, he used Goodyear Aviation disc brakes, adapted from aircraft systems and manufactured in his own workshops with radial drilling inside the discs for lightness and heat dissipation. Those brakes gave the Vanwall a stopping advantage that most of the grid simply could not match. The gearbox design borrowed from Ferrari and used a Porsche-designed 5-speed synchromesh gear set. The fuel tank construction and piping came from Italian suppliers. Even his own thin wall bearings were derived from American patents. One of Vandervell's own associates summed him up as simply a rugged old bugger. He took that as a compliment. His philosophy was brutally practical. Go to the best in the world wherever they are and use whatever it takes to beat Ferrari. The result was a car that was British in name, international in engineering, and lethal on the track. Over 80% of you watching this right now are not subscribed. If you care about the way things used to be built and the people who risked everything to build them, hit subscribe. We cover stories like this every week. Number 4. The 1957 breakthrough changed everything. On July 20th, 1957, at the Aintree circuit near Liverpool, something happened that had not occurred in 34 years. A British-built car won a Formula One World Championship race. Sterling Moss had started on pole position in his Vanwall, but an engine misfire forced him into the pits after 21 laps. His teammate Tony Brooks, still nursing injuries from a crash at Le Mans the previous month, was called in to hand over his car. Moss climbed into Brooks's Vanwall in 9th place, broke his own lap record chasing down the leaders, and charged through the entire field to win in front of a jubilant British crowd. It was a shared drive, the last time two drivers would share a car to win a Formula One championship race in history. And it was a British car with British drivers. The last time that had happened in a major Grand Prix was 1923, when Henry Seagrave won the French Grand Prix in a sunbeam. 34 years of Italian and German dominance had ended in a single afternoon. Vandervell followed that up with two more wins at Pescara and Monza later that season, with Moss finishing second in the Drivers' Championship, behind Juan Manuel Fangio. The Vanwall was no longer a curiosity. It was a genuine threat to Ferrari. Number 3. The driver lineup was the best in Britain. For 1958, Vandervell assembled a three-driver squad that was arguably the strongest in the entire championship. Stirling Moss was already considered the fastest driver in the world, a man who had finished second in the Drivers' Championship 3 years running and was desperate for a title. Tony Brooks, nicknamed the racing dentist because he was studying dentistry while racing Grand Prix cars at the highest level, was one of the most naturally talented and mechanically sympathetic drivers of his generation. He rarely overdrove the car, which meant fewer mechanical failures. And Stuart Lewis Evans, a quiet 28-year-old from Kent, whose father had been a mechanic for the racing driver Earl Howe, completed the lineup. Lewis Evans had earned his seat with a stunning fourth-place finish on his championship debut at Monaco in 1957, driving an underpowered Connaught against the factory Maseratis and Ferraris. Ferrari had Mike Hawthorn, Peter Collins and Luigi Musso. On paper, the teams were evenly matched, but Vanwall faced a major engineering challenge heading into the season. New regulations required all cars to run on aviation fuel instead of the alcohol-based mixtures used in previous years. The Vanwall's large-bore cylinders had relied on the cooling properties of alcohol, and switching to aviation fuel meant the engines ran significantly hotter. Vandervell's engineers spent the winter redesigning valves and pistons to cope with the increased temperatures. The work paid off. On the track, Vanwall's combination of speed, aerodynamics and driver talent would prove decisive. Number 2. Moss won 4 races and still lost the championship by a single point. The 1958 season was one of the most dramatic in Formula One history. Vanwall won 6 of the 10 championship races. Moss won at the Netherlands, Portugal and Morocco. Brooks won at Belgium, Germany and Italy. Lewis Evans contributed crucial points with podium finishes at Belgium and Portugal. Between them, they dominated the season in a way no British team had ever done before. Vanwall clinched the inaugural Constructors' World Championship with 48 points to Ferrari's 40. It was the first time the title had ever been awarded, and the first name ever engraved on the trophy was Vanwall. Mission accomplished. Those bloody red cars had been beaten, except for one cruel twist. Despite winning 4 races that season, including non-championship events, Moss lost the Drivers' Championship to Ferrari's Mike Hawthorn by a single point. Hawthorn won just 1 race all year, the French Grand Prix at Reims. It remains one of only 2 occasions in Formula One history where a driver won the championship with only 1 victory in the entire season. The reason Moss lost comes down to one of the most famous acts of sportsmanship in sporting history. At the Portuguese Grand Prix, Hawthorn spun on the final lap and was about to be disqualified for pushing his car against the direction of the circuit. Moss, who had won the race, voluntarily went to the stewards and testified that Hawthorn had actually pushed his car on the pavement, not on the racing surface itself. The stewards reinstated Hawthorn's points. 2 races later, those exact points gave Hawthorn the title by 1 point over Moss. When asked years later if he regretted it, Moss said he had no hesitation. He would do it again. Number 1. The victory cost Vandervell everything. The final race of 1958 was the Moroccan Grand Prix at the Ain Diab circuit in Casablanca. The Constructors' Championship was already decided in Vanwall's favour. Moss won the race. It should have been a celebration. Instead, it became the final tragedy in what was already the deadliest season in Formula One history. 4 drivers had been killed that year, including Ferrari's Peter Collins and Luigi Musso. On lap 42, Stuart Lewis-Evans lost control of his Vanwall when the drivetrain locked up at speed. The car slammed into the barriers at high speed and burst into flames. Lewis-Evans climbed out of the cockpit, but his overalls were on fire and he sustained catastrophic burns. Vandervell chartered a private Viscount airliner to fly Lewis-Evans back to Britain. Several seats were removed from the cabin to make space for a stretcher. Lewis-Evans lay covered in bandages, sipping tea and chatting as best he could, but his brave and uncomplaining manner masked the severity of his injuries. He was admitted to the specialist burns unit at East Grinstead Hospital. He died 6 days later. He was 28 years old. Vandervell was devastated. His own health, already weakened by years of stress, heavy smoking, and the relentless intensity of running a championship racing team, collapsed entirely. In January 1959, Vandervell Products announced that the team was withdrawing from competition. The Vanwall never raced at full factory strength again. Vandervell himself died in 1967 at the age of 68. He had built a racing team with one purpose: beat Ferrari. He did it. He won the first Constructors' Championship in Formula One history, and then the cost of that victory destroyed everything he had built. The Vanwall's name sits first on the Constructors' Championship trophy, ahead of every team that followed. Cooper, Lotus, Ferrari, McLaren, Williams, Mercedes, Red Bull. They all came after. Vandervell got there first. If this changed how you think about the origins of British motorsport, subscribe. More coming soon.